Hello everybody, welcome back to Get to the Point Tech Reviews. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm going to go through it mostly with my raw thoughts. I have taken a couple of notes here on the side. I'm just going to take a peek once in a while to make sure I don't miss anything. But I figured I did one recording with going through the notes and it just felt a little bit too rigid. So we're just going to try to freewheel it this time. So today we're going to go through the good and the bad, and then we're going to get to the point and talk about whether you should buy this thing or not. I'm going to try to keep it pretty quick, so let's get into it. Starting with the good, this thing's got excellent build quality, at least in the main unit itself. We'll talk more about the other disappointing parts, which is mostly the dock, in a bit, but it's got a nice design, it's pretty solid, it feels really good in the hand, it doesn't look or feel like a toy anymore, which I think is really notable. It's got these really nice colored accents on the side, but it's otherwise very muted. I'm a big fan of matte black. This is almost matte black everything, so this is really nice. The screen is nice. I originally was saying to people that I wouldn't end up buying this at launch if it didn't come with an OLED screen, because my Switch 1 was a similar situation where I bought the first gen Switch and then it kind of came out with the OLED later and I regretted my purchase. But it did take a few years for that to come out. All the early reviews of this device said that the screen was surprisingly nice, so I kind of said, why not? Let's try it out. I have to say, it's light years better than the original Switch LCD screen. The colors pop, it's got nice contrast. Sure, it's not inky blacks like an OLED, but it's fine. And realistically, my original take on this was that the screen wasn't getting bright enough, but that was, I found later, because I still have automatic brightness on. If you turn the automatic brightness off, things get really bright. But of course, when you do that, you'll have brighter screen at the expense of battery life. The other thing to note is that generally this thing is like a mirror. It reflects everything you're in your environment right back at you. And so actually right now you're probably seeing an example of that with the ring light. And so no matter how bright this thing gets, it will always look like a mirror. And so when you're sitting by a window or outside, it's a lot harder to use this screen than it is when you're just indoors. It's not a deal breaker. It's fine. Almost every screen in the world is like this. I think the only one that kind of gets away with it is the Steam Deck because it has a anti-matte screen. Did I say anti-matte? I meant anti-glare. This thing's got a fan that's really effective and extremely quiet. I didn't even notice it at all when I was playing any games. Usually in between loading screens and Mario Kart World, I would hear it kind of pumping out the hot heat. But it was doing it without any whining noises. For those of you with Steam Decks, especially the early ones, you know that the fan can really be whiny. This does not have that problem in any way. It's really quiet. I'm also happy to report for all you Steam Deck vent sniffers that the new console's vent smell is here too. If you know, you know. While we're up here, the USB-C plug on the top is a very welcome addition. It makes it a lot easier to charge and play. The old Switch, which only had the USB-C port on the bottom, was really in an inconvenient spot and was only designed with the dock in mind. The volume buttons are really squishy. They don't really give you a lot of feedback. It's hard to just press it once and done. You almost always end up pressing it multiple times by accident. It's not a big deal, but it's just notable that I don't love the button here. And the cartridge slot here is actually really well done. I don't know why they felt the need to add this metal reinforcement up here. The old Switch did not have that. No complaints. I mean, it works. It's going to be hard to see with this ring light kind of causing reflections, but the backwards compatibility with Switch 1 games is seamless, and it's a welcome change from Nintendo's past behaviors. Overall, I've had no problems playing any of the games I've had on my Switch 1, virtual or with the cart. I've also been playing Super Mario 3D World with the Switch 1 Pro controller, and it's been working great. No complaints at all. If you already have Switch 1 Pro controllers, do not buy the Switch 2 Pro controllers. They're mostly the same thing, just more expensive. Sure, they've got a couple of extra buttons, but it's really not worth it. They're fully backwards compatible. Save your money. So a lot of the good parts about the Switch 2 are pretty well known and everyone's been talking about it. So let's just jump into the more disappointing aspects of it. First up, we have battery life. Now, the first time I went through the filming of this review, I actually had some data that suggested that the battery life on this was worse than it actually is. I'll explain why. I wanted to test the standby life difference between the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. And realistically, the only way I could think of doing that was to unplug them at the exact same time, leave them both alone, untouched for a period of time, and then check on them once in a blue moon just to see what's going on. Both of them were on in terms of just being on sleep mode, connected to Wi-Fi, but otherwise identical. What I found initially was that I unplugged it at 9 a.m. and at 7 p.m. that same day, the Switch 1 had 99% battery life and the Switch 2 had 94% battery life. Nothing alarming, but then the next day, by around noon, I checked it again and the Switch 1 had 95% battery life and the Switch 2 had 76% battery life. I thought, that's very odd. Something is wrong here. What I found was I had left Super Mario 3D World running on the Switch 2. Not running per se, it was still sleeping, but loaded into memory. So I realized I needed to do the test again. I killed that software. I actually did I double checked for software updates and I did a reboot and I did the same test again. This time, I'm happy to report slightly better results. This time I unplugged them at 9:30 p.m. on a given day. And by 7:30 a.m. the next morning, the Switch 1 was at 98% and the Switch 2 was at 97%. Pretty good, but just a couple of hours. At 9 p.m. later that next day, the Switch 1 was at 95% and the Switch 2 was at 93%. So here you can see that the Switch 2 is still suffering a little bit on keeping up with the Switch 1. Keeping in mind, the Switch 1 is a launch period Switch 1. It's really old. And this is brand new and it's not keeping up. Now in gameplay, it's also a little bit disappointing. Each Grand Prix tournament in Mario Kart World was eating about 10% battery life. So you can imagine about 4 races or so, and then I would basically go down 10%. I think you got to be near an outlet if you're going to be doing long gaming sessions, let's be honest here. Now, compared to the Steam Deck, this battery life situation is not bad. I would expect better from Nintendo though, given where the Switch 1 was in its life cycle when it ended with the OLED version, and even the refreshed LCD version compared to my V1. I think it would have been better if they just said, you know what, we're going to make this console a couple of millimeters thicker to accommodate a larger battery. This is one of the biggest disappointing parts of the Switch 2. Another factor is that the Switch 2 doesn't make it easy for you to fully shut it down. Generally speaking, when you're running the console, by default, if you press the power button, or if you go down here to the home screen, it's sleep mode. You really have to go out of your way to hold down the power button for a few seconds, wait for the prompt to come up, go down to power options, go into that, and then go to power off. Nobody's going to be doing this unless they're not going to be playing for a few days. Why am I mentioning that? It's because when I had a game running, which is more often than not what's going to be happening if you're using the sleep mode a lot, the battery life was atrocious. I haven't done an exact test with the Switch 1 to see how it handles having a game running on standby, but I don't remember it being that bad. In any case, this is not really an issue. Most people will be leaving it on the dock all the time. It's more of a problem when you're traveling, and you just have to be near an outlet once in a while. Next up, we've got buttons. The buttons they're pretty clicky in a bad way. I'm going to play an audio sample for you in a moment to hear what I'm talking about, but they're just really digitally clicky buttons. There's very little depth to them. They have some different sounds depending on which buttons you're pressing. It's the same for the triggers. The triggers are digital as well. They have they have movement, but they just click at the end. They're not analog triggers. I would have preferred something squishier, like the Switch 1 Pro controller is perfect, or the Steam Deck if you're comparing to another portable device. But this is just personal preference. The ergonomics of the Switch 2 are pretty awkward. I would often get hand cramps from holding the A button down in Mario Kart, and that's like a core premise of the game. No one's going to pretend that the Switch was ever easy to hold. or comfortable to hold, but it just seems worse now that it's bigger than before and heavier. Using a Pro controller is a much nicer experience, but that's just an additional cost you have to factor in. The dock is extremely flimsy and poor quality. I mean, it's simply the most disappointing part of the whole package. I'm going to run some B-roll right now about what the dock looks like and feels like when I saw it in my impressions video because it's currently hooked up to my TV. But in general, the Switch doesn't sit firmly in the dock. It rocks back and forth, forward and back. It's a lot more difficult to reseat the controllers into the system while it's docked if you store your dock behind a TV, where I do because of space constraints. In the old Switch, you can approach it from the top and slide down onto the Switch. In this one, because you have to pop the controllers out sideways, you really need to leave a lot of buffer room around the Switch while it's in the dock. It's just not well thought out, in my opinion. The shoulder buttons are pretty easy to accidentally press while you're using the Joy-Con triggers. They have too much surface area down the side of the Joy-Con. I noticed this mostly in Super Mario Odyssey, where you need to use the button combinations a lot more than you do in Mario Kart World. But in general, you can see that while I'm holding the controller, if I'm pressing the trigger, the side of my index finger can very easily press this button. This button is generally pressable from anywhere on the surface area, which is an amazing engineering feat, but it makes it more prone to accidental touches from the side of your finger when you're just trying to use the trigger. Lastly, the Switch 2 only supports the expensive microSD Express cards. You can't even use standard microSD cards for storage like you could with the original Switch 1. The only time you can use the original Switch 1's microSD card is during the initial system transfer, which I didn't even bother doing. It's just a bit disappointing because other systems like the Xbox give you the option of plugging in an old external drive for storage expansion, even if it means slightly slower load times, and you just can't do it here. Speaking of system migrations, when I set up the Switch 2 using the system migration, it did not wipe out my original Switch like all the guides said it would. This is actually a good thing because I didn't want to do that in the first place. It left all my games intact on the original Switch, it moved the virtual carts to the Switch 2, and that's all it took. I don't know exactly why all the guides suggested that it would wipe the original Switch. You can see here that all my games are still there, the game saves are still there, the virtual carts are empty because they've been moved here, but I can move them back. So no complaints here. One other random note, I have no idea how loud the dock fan is. I've never heard it turn on so far. I have no idea if that's because it's not working or if it's just really quiet or it just hasn't needed to turn on. Just worth noting. So overall, what do I think? Should you buy this thing? In my opinion, the Switch 2 is more like a Switch Pro rather than a Switch 2. It's an expensive system with expensive accessories and expensive games. I liken it to the pro versions of the Xbox and the PlayStation. It's fully backwards compatible. It mostly plays the same type of games. There's a few additional gimmicks and it's got a lot more power in it, but overall it's very similar to the original Switch. If you only had to pick one portable gaming console, I think I would rather have the Steam Deck. Since it's just a PC, it's more versatile. Your money goes a lot further because you can use it for a lot of other things than just gaming. If you really want to, you could install Windows on it and do whatever you want. You could dual boot this, use it for school, whatever. Another benefit is that the Steam sales are really good. There are almost always sales going on, and it's the same games on both systems will always be cheaper on the PC. And historically, Nintendo doesn't have a good track record for backwards compatibility. Now, what they've done with the Switch 2 is new and welcome, and I thank you, Nintendo, for supporting the old Switch 1 games and even the accessories. But from a track record perspective, there's no competing with the PC gaming market. I've been playing games that I purchased decades ago on this thing, and they work perfectly fine. Ultimately, though, you're buying the Switch 2 for the first-party Nintendo titles, and that's a fair point. It's why I bought it, and mostly the reason why most anybody would be buying this. The problem is, there's just not enough of them yet to justify owning one. Right now, Mario Kart World is the only legit Switch 2 exclusive. I'm going to make a separate video about that game, but, it's not enough to justify this whole console. The setup that works the best for me right now is having both a Steam Deck and a Switch 2. The Switch 2 covers my Switch 1 games, and the Steam Deck covers pretty much everything else. Most of the Xbox and PlayStation exclusives eventually make their way to PC anyway, and eventually the Steam Deck will get upgraded to something fancier, and I'll be able to play even newer games whenever that comes out. But again, I would suggest that unless you have some cash burning a hole in your pocket, or you just feel like you must be on the cutting edge regardless, I think you can take a wait and see approach with this one. If you are going to buy a Switch 2, be sure to check out my reviews of the official Nintendo case as well as the third-party Surge Carry case. You'd be surprised to see what's inside. Until next time, if you enjoyed this video or found it useful at all, please like and subscribe. I'm just starting out and every like, subscribe, and comment is really helpful. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.